We are at the top of the hour, 2 o'clock. So we'll get this show on the road. It's great to have everyone here who could join, along with our guest panelists. We're going to have an awesome discussion today that revolves around R&D tax credits and food safety companies, and a lot of technology that's happening in the industry, some trends that we're seeing. And so, again, I appreciate everyone's time, and wanted to go over just a quick agenda so that we can kind of see some things that we're going to cover. So first and foremost, I definitely want to introduce our presenters. We're going to talk a little bit about Leyton, how the R&D tax credit works, and then we're going to fold things right into getting to know our guests and talking about trends that we're seeing in the food safety industry as it relates to technology, R&D happening behind the scenes. What are some potential examples? We'll walk you a little through the process on our end, what it means to kind of pursue an R&D credit, and what does it look like to work with Leyton, and then we'll leave some time at the end for some Q&A. If anyone has any questions that pop up during our panel discussion that are related to the topic, we're going to try to field that in real time so we can have some participation happen. And if there's any kind of just general questions, you can pop those in the chat, and we have that being monitored, and we'll get to those towards the end. So we'll kick this off here. So wanted to meet our presenters here. The guy that's talking right now, that's myself, Brandon Carroll. I'm a consultant here at Leyton, educating various industries on all these R&D incentives out there. I am joined by my colleague, Maurice Washington. Maurice, you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Yes, my name is Maurice Washington. I'm the agricultural technical consultant here at Leyton, USA, and I have a PhD in agricultural engineering and biosystems from Iowa State University.
Excellent. Thanks, Maurice. And then two other guests that we're excited to have are Jennifer Crandall and Martin Buknovich. And Jennifer, maybe if you want to take a couple seconds to introduce yourself.
Sorry, couldn't figure out how to unmute. My name is Jennifer Crandall. I'm CEO and founder of Safe Food en Route. We are a food safety consulting firm that, what I like to say, is making corporate level food safety programs accessible to small and medium-sized businesses. A lot of my background is I'm a Purdue grad with a bachelor's in food science, and I've spent a majority of my career, 8 years in the manufacturing space, pre-FSMA and pre-GFSI requirements, and then the latter 12 years prior to starting my own company were with the Kroger company in their corporate food technology department and their sourcing department. And so I have a lot of background in managing large volumes of data related to supplier compliance in the food safety space. And like I said, I founded Safe Food en Route. That's been almost 3 years now that I founded it in 2018 in March. So that's a little bit of my background.
Excellent. It's awesome to have you, Jennifer.
Thank you for having me.
How about great to have you here. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hey, it's great to be here today. My name is Martin Buknovich, and I'm with Penn State Extension. I've been with Extension for about close to 15 years. Prior to that, in my role and as part of Extension, a lot of what I do is to provide technical support and training to the food industry. And we do that really throughout the Northeast, and we have clients that come from all over. Prior to that, I worked about 20 years in the food industry, primarily in technical management roles with companies like Heinz, as well as with laboratories like ABC Research down in Florida. I have a master's MBA from Penn State, master's in food science from Virginia Tech, and happy to be here.
Excellent. We're happy too. Appreciate you taking the time. So really quick overview of Leyton. We're a global firm. We operate in about 12 countries, 32 offices. over 20 years of experience, and we're really laser focused on research and development incentives. And so all the companies, or excuse me, countries that we operate in have made a permanent commitment to these types of R&D incentives. It is a really, it's an amazing tool to recoup your development costs essentially, and reward for innovating and trying new things. Leyton brings a dual expertise approach. We've got on one side scientists, engineers, on the other side tax experts and financial folks to work together to help a company maximize their claim. And so that's really Leyton in a nutshell. So I'll do an overview on really how the R&D credit works. So the credit's been around for actually quite some time. It's been around since the 80s, but it was made permanent in 2015. So in that sense, it's still fairly new. It used to be up for renewal every 2 years. And now that it's permanent, this is a tool to dollar for dollar reduce what a company's payroll tax liability would be, or income tax liability. And so that's essentially how it works as a tool. So what does it mean for your business? You can use it to, in real time, reduce what you owe in income tax or payroll tax. You can bank these credits for future tax liabilities. So if you are on the verge of profitability as a company, this is usually a great time to start banking those credits so that you'll have more saved up, so that when you do start having tax liabilities, you'll be able to offset those even more into the future. It also increases a business valuation, so there's a lot of great benefit to that. And it also frees up cash for your business. If you think about, if you have a $100,000 R&D credit, that's going to reduce your tax bill by $100,000. So where else would you spend that money? And that's really the mindset you want to put yourselves in. How to benefit from the credit. So we went over, there's the actual federal and in-state credit just to reduce taxes. And there's also payroll tax credit. The payroll tax credit was introduced really to help those businesses that are qualified startups. Traditionally, you've always been able to reduce your income tax, but if you have no income tax, you're not profitable yet, you're still operating at a loss, that could be happening for some time. So how do you feel the relief? And that's through payroll tax, which is typically around 6.2% for every W-2 employee. So, if you start adding up that with all of the wages that you pay, it can be a lot. And so to be qualified as a small business, you have to be operating within the first 5 years. And you can only look at the previous year for the credit, and you kind of need to be operating underneath 5 million in gross receipts or revenue to qualify. And so that's really a little bit about how companies can feel the benefit. So show me the R&D. Qualifying work has to meet some criteria. I want to have Maurice walk us through the 4-part test. This is how the IRS defines R&D, and this is essentially what our team helps you kind of interpret.
All right, thank you, Brandon. So as Brandon said, the IRS uses a 4-part test to define what they consider research and development. So the first test is what we call the permitted purpose. Basically, to qualify for the R&D tax credit, the activity that you're doing has to be new or improved product, process, technique, formulation, or software. It doesn't have to be new to the overall industry. It just has to be new to your business component, to your company. The second test is what we call technological in nature. The activity or the product or business component that is created has to have foundational principles in the hard sciences. So your physical, biological sciences, computer sciences, engineering, anything, chemistry, anything along those lines. Only thing is it cannot be related to brand building, or maybe you've done some research on marketing. It can't apply to what we call the soft sciences. It has to have those hard science foundation principles. The third test is what we call the process of experimentation, where at least one alternative is evaluated. So simply that qualifying activity has to, of course, evaluate at least one alternative. There has to be some type of confirmation of a hypothesis through trial and error, testing, modeling, refining, or discarding of a hypothesis. And keep in mind, looking at the process of experimentation or the scientific method, typically, sometimes the products or what you're experimenting on does not work. That can still be qualified because you're adding to that knowledge base that was not existent in the first place. So if it doesn't work, that can still be qualified. And then that plays into the fourth test, what we call the elimination of uncertainty. So the activity must be intended to discover information to eliminate uncertainty concerning the capability of a method or developing or improving a product or process for the product design. So this is what we call the four-part test. And this is what the IRS uses to define research and development.
Excellent. Thank you, Maurice. 4 parts to this test, some requiring, some pretty easy interpretation, but others, there's some gray areas. And this is why I think it's really important to make sure you're working with a team that understands kind of how to define an activity as R&D, because it really is an activity-based credit. That's kind of how we work backwards with companies. So what can be claimed? Maurice, do you want to walk us through some expenditures?
Sure, I can absolutely do that. So looking at the qualifying research expenditures, we have 4 categories. The first category is salaries. So looking at the salaries of those individuals who are directly involved in the R&D, those individuals who are directly supporting the R&D, and those individuals who are directly supervising that R&D. So I always say it's one step above and then one step below of the main individual conducting the R&D. The second test is what we call 1099s or eligible subcontractors. So we can claim up to 65% of any 1099s that you are potentially using. So you can be contracting out some type of rapid testing, quality assurance testing that you're doing on the actual rapid testing method that you've come up with, and you are contracting out to a lab to verify and validate that testing method or mechanism. That's just an example within the food safety industry. The third test is raw materials and supplies used to conduct that research. That's usually where a lot of the expenditures come from. So any supplies that you're using to conduct or create the actual product. And when we say supplies, that means any tangible property other than land. Basically, it can't be depreciable. So if it's any type of large machinery that you're using, that can't be claimed under the QREs. And then the last example is computers. So when they came out with this R&D tax credit in the 80s, they used a lot of old terminology because a lot of people actually didn't have computers. So when they were conducting research, they had to lease those computers. So that language still exists, externally leased for conducting research. So if you're using any type of cloud computing technology, or maybe you've come up with some type of proprietary software that you use for tracing in the supply chain, that could potentially be qualified.
Excellent. So there you have it, four categories that we look at to kind of sum up your qualified research expenditures. So we went through, introduced you to Jennifer and Martin. I want to segue into a good discussion where the industry is and where it's going, and kind of hopefully we can get some good observations going. And so for the panel discussion, we've got a few questions that we wanted to cover, and We don't have to really color, in the lines per se, but I thought this would be good guidance on kind of some topics to hit. Obviously, last year was a pretty tough year. That's spilling over into this year. We're definitely not out of the weeds here with COVID, and this has had to have some type of impact on not just food supply chain, but the safety of it. And so I don't know if Martin or Jennifer, you want to take the lead on this, or as far as how you've seen this affecting companies, the space, regulation, anything like that.
I think a lot of it with the COVID has really impacted how companies distribute product. I mean, there's been a big movement from distributing direct through the food service channel, moving it into the retail channels, and I think that's been a big challenge for a lot of the industry. I mean, I think that's probably the biggest thing. I think the second thing that's really been impactful, and I think this is where some of this can come in, is really labor. Labor has been very difficult to get in for many companies. I think companies have really had to start to look at, how do they better, meet the demands of their customers while being challenged against not having maybe as many people available to work in their companies. And so that is probably the second big thing. And certainly, of course, losing workers to the disease has also been it's been a tragedy of anything. But I think from challenges moving forward, certainly trying to realign their channels, and then also trying to work and with the shortened workforce. And that workforce, I think that'll continue for some time until vaccines are all in place and stuff like that. But it should be an opportunity for companies to start to think about, how do I maybe use technology to reduce the amount of people that I have in my facility.
That's an interesting.
Yeah, I probably could echo a lot what Martin said, because in the beginning of the pandemic, we noticed that the food industry was getting hit really hard because of the essential workers and how they were spreading it within their facilities, and some of there was illnesses being passed, and I can remember, like, in April, this was a pretty hard hit in the industry. The owner of Gilster Mary Lee passed away because of it, and it had spread through the factory that he was working in. So that it was just like, it was devastating to watch our essential workers being affected by that. But there was a pivot, and to Martin's point, we had to, and I think regulatory agencies are trying to figure out how to help facilitate this more. The FDA has been studying it, where we had a supply chain stop at, like, we were selling it to food distribution models, and the restaurants weren't open. So what do? We have this excess of food that can't get to the retail because it's not labeled in a way that's appropriate for retail. Because that's not the way the regulations are written. We are allowed to do different labels on products that are going to the food service distribution model versus the retail establishment. So that's been a huge pivot that I've noticed. And I even noticed, like, now the FDA has been giving an allowance to that. So some of the restaurants that could not stay open because they needed to shut down due to COVID within their communities or within their restaurant space, they are now able to sell out the back door some of the food distribution products in uncooked form, or not fully prepared, let's put it that way. So able to sell that and still get some of the product moving through their facilities in a unique way. So that was one of the biggest things that I saw. But I also think our model in general and the industry is shifting, because restaurants are learning that they need to be more able to do carry out and to do delivery that they're not used to doing. So that was another thing. As a food safety professional, I was concerned about all of these all these small independent mom and pop restaurants. What can they do for making sure that they're delivering it appropriately when they're not used to doing the delivery business model? So we saw that happening in my small community. A pizza company was offering help to a local restaurant as well, but that local restaurant did not have the type of packaging and tests and that sort of thing to make sure that they were getting the product to us safely. So those are just a few of the things that I saw as well. And I think, right, I know the FDA is trying to pivot with it. I've been listening to a lot of webinars and they discuss these as well. So it's been interesting. Let's put it that way. And I do agree, it's probably not going away. The vaccinations are going to take some time to get distributed and get us back to what we would quote unquote call normal.
And if I could just add one more thing on to what Jennifer just said, I think moving forward, one of the things we've recognized the fact that, supply chains have to become a lot more flexible. And I think not only on the distribution side of it, but also on the supply side of it. And we've seen, just a move to basically trying to secure, supply chains that are in place, to expand into secondary suppliers and have those secondary suppliers available. And so things like that moving forward, again, and certainly, we'll talk about it in a few minutes, is of course looking at traceability and tracking and all of that as we work with our suppliers. These things are going to become bigger and bigger, a bigger need for companies, regardless of whether the COVID's here or not.
Definitely. We're going to see, and again, I kind of quote some of the things that I've listened to the FDA talk about, just being able to be, like Martin said, a little bit more nimble in our approach, and being able to sell products maybe we're not used to selling, or to, make available that pivot to, okay, we can't sell it through the restaurant distribution chain, so now we need to sell it through the retail, or we need to give it to, which locally in the Cincinnati area, there's a great community doing more of a soup kitchen approach, and so they're taking all that waste and then reselling it in the soup kitchen side of it from a nonprofit way. It has been very interesting, and I think the FDA's comments, we handled it as well as we absolutely possibly could. So it is deserving that we compliment the food industry for how they were able to maneuver through it, because it's not been an easy challenge at all. This has been a very difficult challenge for many people, and the food industry has been hit very, I would say, I want to say hard, but they've done a great job with managing it and trying to absorb the problems that we've had to encounter and overcome.
Oh, those are really all good points. It just, I live down the street from a restaurant that's mostly does delivery, and obviously their business is booming, whereas other businesses that didn't typically have that model have had to pivot pretty quickly. I think that's changing a lot, and I think it also makes me think of, when you think about COVID itself and its ability to live on a surface, there's a lot of information that's gone backwards and forwards of, what's the risk there, and I don't know, as far as relating to regulatory needs, is there a better wash or sanitization that has to happen for certain kind of certain produce? So I guess that story is still unfolding as we go into this year.
Yeah, I don't know if Martin wants to comment on that. There's concern, like the CDC has said and the FDA has said, that the surfaces are not, I don't quote me. I don't want to be quoted on that. I guess they're not as concerned about surfaces as they are the respiratory contraction of it. But it has impacted, to your point, Brandon, the import community has been impacted tremendously, because if you think about all of the food that comes from overseas, and specifically from countries like China, that has been, they're obviously been impacted significantly. And there was a lot of question and doubt on, can I get it from their products? Can I get it if, it comes from China versus the United States, or from China versus Europe even? And so I think that, we rely on the regulatory agencies to give us that guidance. And but yeah, the questions still continue to come. There's still so many unanswered questions related to the illness itself and how it spread. And, obviously a lot of controversy around it politically as well. And so our hope is that we'll get more of those answers in 2021 and continue to be able to get the guidance that we need from the regulatory agencies on how to approach it.
Yeah. think that's the best way to put it. There's still a lot to happen. A lot to
Hey, Brandon, this one quick thing. Before we go to this next question, I want our panelists just to think about this question in regards to field production, meat production, all the way up through the supply chain, and how you see the impact in those different areas in food production.
Regarding COVID?
No, but regarding this next question, what are some of the biggest food safety issues?
Oh, okay.
Food
Sure.
system
Yeah.
production today?
Yeah, certainly there's a number of different issues that we see in the food system today that are going to be coming up. And certainly, much of the food industry has already been undergoing and working with some of these things. Without a doubt, the traceability thing is probably the next component that's on the horizon. And, working and developing and putting in place, these different systems, including, say, blockchain. The industry's, has a long way to go with that, but still it's something that's going to be on the horizon for tracking and traceability. And, the government is going to be is somewhat limited in what they can enforce or put in place. But still it's going to come down to companies, developing and putting these things in place. Again, especially where there is some regulatory compliance requirements that are in place. I think the other big issue that we have, we've had this, I wouldn't say it's an issue, but it's really third-party audit compliance. Companies, if they want to sell into the larger food distribution network, if they want to get into places like Kroger, or they want to get into places like Walmart, certainly companies have to be third-party compliant, and that's of course with GFSI, whether it's SQF or BRC or whichever audit body they want. That's of course developing policies and procedures, and having the different types of controls that they have in place. In another big area that that we work a lot with, of course, is prevention of foodborne illness through testing, monitoring, through different controls that they have within their operations. And I think that's going to continue to be a big challenge, not only from pathogen perspective, but also from allergen perspective, which tends to be, or has continued to be, a big issue. So having systems in place to control, allergens within their operations as well as on their, on the products.
Yeah, I think Martin's stealing my answers. I'm just kidding. No, I do agree. The traceability, just to circle back to that real quick, traceability, there's a ton of focus going on that. There's a rule being reviewed right now. It's out for public comment, with the due date being, as I think for final comments, is February 23rd of this year, to be able to give comment back on that rule. And it's pretty extensive. So there's a lot of companies that are studying that and what its impact is on the entire supply chain, because it is shifting it a little bit from the study that I've been doing myself on it. It is shifting a little bit of that from farm to fork concept of who is responsible for what documentation they need to be managing and looking at. And then from the third party compliance side, absolutely, coming out of Kroger, and that was my main responsibility when I was there, was to monitor the compliance to GFSI when it first rolled out, whenever they started requiring that benchmark audit scheme. So I was looking at it from a large perspective of thousands of manufacturing companies, and how to be able to aggregate that data, summarize it in a way that was meaningful internally, but also being able to hold people accountable at the individual level and at the supplier compliance level to make sure that they were meeting the requirements. There's still a lot of conversations around that. And then he's absolutely right on prevention, monitoring, controls. That's a huge thing that's going on with, the Food Safety Modernization Act puts a lot of requirements on the FDA regulated items, that they need to do validations for their studies to make sure that they are, legit, that they are actually taking that hazard and reducing the risk for it. So there's a lot engaged in that. And then the other thing I would add to it, which third-party compliance does tend to touch on, but leadership commitment, And that's more of that soft skill thing. So kind of going back to what Marie said earlier about soft skills and maybe things that I don't know will qualify for QRE, but how to measure that is actually something that is just as important. And a lot of the third party compliance audits capture that of what the leadership is doing to invest in their programs, what they're putting in place and intentionally and mindfully putting with their teams to give them the resources to be able to implement some of these programs. So though it's not maybe something that would qualify for a QRE, it still would qualify because the other three factors, the supplier compliance monitoring, the third party compliance, paying for that audit, hiring someone to do that audit, doing the validation studies, those take weeks. And extension offices like Penn State will help, I'm sure, but there's also a lot of expense that goes into that. And then traceability programs, there's probably going to be a lot of software movement. And Martin mentioned blockchain. That may or may not be the full solution, or maybe some of the software companies that are working on it will be implementing programs that tap into the blockchain. So there's a lot of unknown, but there's a lot of investment that's going to go in those three that is started by that leadership commitment.
Interesting. Yeah, there's a lot. I know the blockchain thing I've heard come up here and there, and I think it's a buzzword. But then when you start to think about, well, how does it really apply, right? And how are people leveraging it in context? That's going to be interesting to see where that lands, and I'm sure it will come in a few different forms. I think the next topic that we wanted to cover for our next question is really just more on the technological trends. And I know that some of this is, it's software, it's the blockchain stuff we were talking about. It's a pretty large supply chain coming from, where food is grown all the way to it finding its way to an actual, consumer. And this makes me think of, supply chain software. This makes me think of companies that are, trying to make the shelf life longer, whether it's in packaging. I was just doing some research on one company who developed a special blue tray to double the shelf life of scallops. And the tray essentially has a mesh fabric at the bottom with a proprietary ingredients on each of these wells. And it basically lets any additional liquid kind of capture it beneath this mesh lining without sitting there and maybe spoiling. And I'm just thinking about all the different types of mechanisms that the industry is working towards to either get approval or meet regulation quicker, right? Because Jennifer, you were saying that can take time. Those studies can take time. So a big hurdle I would think for a lot of companies is like, how do we speed that process up? We have something that we think is ready. We have to go through all these steps to get a stamp of approval.
Yeah. I'll just jump onto this first. I think there's a couple challenges. One always is having somebody available to help do that. And whether that's somebody internally that you hire or company hires, or whether that's somebody as a consultant that they bring in, it's often difficult for smaller companies to manage the amount of technological changes that are coming up. And we certainly realize that. I mean, it's just not an easy thing to do, and you never know exactly which way it's going to go. So understanding that, and understanding that, whether it's, within your own company, you hire somebody, or whether you go out and use consultants to keep you informed, or even as you're developing systems to think about it down the road of where you might need to be. Do you need to have, increased abilities to, track and being able to communicate lot code information with your suppliers? Maybe it's internally with your own company, having the right people to be able to go out and do analytical sampling out in your own facility. Whether that's going out and doing pathogen testing, or whether it's going out and realign your things. So I think it's always a challenge, and we deal a lot with companies, and it's a good part of what we do at Penn State is to help try to answer some of these questions. But it's difficult sometimes for smaller companies to have you can't have people sitting around. So how do you being able to meet these technological challenges as they come up?
Right. Yeah, I would imagine that if you're a smaller company, Jennifer, this is probably where you would come in and help guide that process. And how do we do this? We don't have the resources, so maybe you could talk a little bit about ways that you guys kind of approach those types of problems.
Yeah, well, I mean, most of the time, so I mean, it's kind of doing the gap analysis of what needs to be done to meet the goals, and then achieving the goals. So like a consultant, if they come in, and I'm sure that Penn State's approach, because extension offices and consultants are kind of playing in the same space. So it's not that, it comes down to what resource can you afford and how big do you need it to be? Because sometimes it might expand past what the extension office is able to do. I work a lot with the Purdue Extension Office on things, and we talk a lot about like, where's the line? Sometimes the line is like, we can give them templates, we can help them develop and design programs, but then there's a point where it's like, well, you need about 200 hours worth of work. We can give you about 30 or 40. So I think like some of the validation studies and the things that need a lot of scientific approach, we're probably going to work hand in hand with an extension office to be able to do that. So if you need to do a study and you need to determine that this piece of equipment is meeting this requirement, like it's actually a valid kill step, and maybe use a baking, a bakery, an oven, for an example, and to validate that process, you have to validate that piece of equipment and prove that it, through a study, that it is actually having a kill step that is applicable to the microbial hazards that are associated with the food that it's baking. So that can be one approach. Another approach might be, what can we do remotely to assist that process? So kind of flipping this on the not so technology focused for like validating a study or validating an allergen testing. We might be the ones guiding you through that process and say, okay, this is what you need to do in order to achieve that. And we can tell you, here's a template for an Excel spreadsheet or something simple like that, and say, okay, you need to record every single time that you do a swab in this area. Here's where we suggest you do the swabs, and here's the approach. And if you ping a positive, here's what you need to do. And we write an SOP around that, a standard operating procedure. So there's certain, it just depends. It's kind of dependent on the type of process that you're working with, the type of product, the type of hazards. There's so many variables that you're bringing up. And then Safe Food and Root focuses a lot on supplier compliance and supplier compliance management, and trying to streamline that process, because some of those trends that like, to me, the technological trends kind of circle back to what we discussed on the former question: traceability. What data points do I need to collect in order to meet the traceability requirements? And they have a specific name for that in specific terms. Is it applicable to my business, or is it applicable to the business prior to me or the business after me? What do I need to pass from one entity to the next? So there's to me, there's a lot of technology trends that are going on around that, from the IT side of the industry, not the food safety and food science trends, but it's still food safety related. And then you mentioned blockchain. Of course, that's hot on everybody's mind. We're all watching to see how that might unfold. And then again, my side of it, so I play a lot in the foreign supplier verification program rule space, and making sure that I'm capturing the data that's required to give me a sense of comfort of what that foreign company is doing, and that they are meeting US requirements. So it's using data, not necessarily creating the data, but using data that's already created and making sure that we're reviewing it and applying that forward. So I don't know if that answers fully what you're thinking, but that was where my mind went when I saw trends. I was like, traceability and supplier compliance again. So, because that's where I'm living most of the time with Safe Food and Root.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I would imagine for companies that are trying to have gain traction in the US, but are foreign entities, they probably have different types of information, and you probably have to figure out, what information can they provide. They might be coming from different countries that have their own regulatory or lack thereof programs. And so I could see how that would complicate things, right? How do you verify that they're adhering to them? Maybe, you have to kind of, I would imagine, familiarize yourself with like what these documents need to look like, and how do I know if this is, legitimate, and where do you kind of establish the level of trustworthiness as far as the size of the company, the space they're trying to get into, and I'm sure it can be quite a process.
Right. And it is like from the perspective of a small and medium sized company, and kind of my mantra I said before, like we're trying to make small and food safety compliance and corporate level programs accessible to those small and medium sized businesses, because exactly what Martin said, they don't always have the ability, they don't always have the people, that have the experience levels. So a small company is hiring people who have less experience, most likely in the industry, because that's the affordability that they have with their budgets. So that's one of the reasons that we kind of positioned ourselves in a way that we want to give them that corporate experience. And I promise I'm not trying to do a shameless plug. This is more of a this is the gap that we see. Is and I'm coming from personal experience. When I was in quality assurance and product development roles in the first 8 years of my career, I was the first 8 years of my career. So I was a rookie. I didn't know what I was doing as much as I do now. I didn't have that kind of backbone, that kind of, I just didn't have that experience or knowledge. So you don't know what you don't know. And what we have tried to do, position ourselves to be able to give that cushion to help them feel like they have a corporate level team that has all that experience and understanding of, and we've made our mistakes, we know what to avoid, we know what to suggest to do differently. And that's the kind of that bridge that, as a consultant, when you hire a consultant, whether through us or through someone else or through an extension office, when you're working with them, you're hiring or working with someone that has gone through it before or knows the right people to help you through it. So it's a necessary, to me, it's a necessary expense as a growing pain. And I wouldn't even like to call it a growing pain. It's more of just a growing expense, that you want to hire people that have that knowledge, that know-how, that experience to be able to help you, guide you through those processes while you grow as a company. Because if your intention is to grow to a middle-sized company, you're going to need to hire people that have the knowledge of how to run a medium, middle-sized company.
Right.
And so you need people who have all spectrums of experience to be able to support your team, to be able to give them that corporate support that they might not have because you're an independent business owner instead of part of a corporation. If that makes sense.
No, absolutely. I think, with all different startups at different stages coming on, there's a need to figure out how can they play game like the big guys without the means or without the knowledge. And so I think it's important that there's an avenue there, and that's I think that's really where Jennifer, your firm comes into play. Next question that I wanted to pivot to talks a little bit about, again, and Jennifer, this is something that I think you probably are well familiar with. Same with you, Martin, is third-party certifications. They obviously play a big influence on what companies have to adhere to. And it also makes me think of where they're going and what they're going to enforce down the road, and how much companies might have to have that foresight to figure out, okay, well, if this is going to hit in next year and we have X, Y, and Z lined up and we're not prepared for that, this could be detrimental to what we're trying to release out on the market. I'm sure that this is probably, an interesting game of chess with timing coming into play on, well, what's enforced now and what will be enforced a year from now, 2 years from now.
Right.
Yeah, it's always hard to guess, but I think a lot of it for companies is being able to really, first get third party audit acceptance or third party audit recognition, and for them to be able to get that and be able to sell into into the various retail spaces that require that is really the key. And of course, once they have that status, is really to make and adjust as the requirements do change. And certainly one thing that Jennifer mentioned earlier is this sort of this thing going with looking at leadership and some of the softer skills, but certainly just getting and holding on to that. And there's always going to be changing demands, especially as companies make changes to their own operation. They have to be able to adjust their systems to hold on to that compliance. We talked a little bit earlier about companies needing to make changes to with the changing marketplace, whether it's supply chain or whatever, and again, along with that, they have to make sure that their systems, their third party audit, the systems that they've established to maintain third party audit certification, those systems also adapt as time goes on.
Yeah, Martin mentioned it earlier, but most of the larger retailers require that type of certification. Many of them are requiring the Global Food Safety Initiative, or what we call GFSI, benchmark audit schemes. And, they've been requiring this. So I think back in 2007 is when Walmart issued the requirement. And whenever a company as large as Walmart makes a decision, the entire industry shifts, right? So some of the things to watch are what are those big companies requiring, even though you might not be ready to go into them. Are they requiring more than the third party certification? And I wouldn't say right now, I think everybody's shifting to make sure that they're meeting regulation requirements in the United States, because the regulatory changes. So this is the first time that the FDA has made changes to their law in over 70 years. And so, Food Safety Modernization Act 10-year anniversary was just, I believe, last month. And now we're looking at implementing the final rule of it, which is the traceability piece. So you can betcha that these third-party certifications are going to start incorporating what that means and pulling from it, even though like GFSI is globally recognized. So they're looking at the entire world. They can't possibly follow all of the regulatory requirements of every single individual country. But what they can do is try to build that, skeleton within their food, their guidelines, their requirements, to make sure that they have that built into their structure of the audit schemes. And so that requirement will probably be built in, or they have, what I have seen a trend in it has been adding on what they call FSMA, like a FSMA addendum. So like companies like Costco and Walmart and Kroger's, those larger companies are saying, well, if you get that certification along with your third party audit, then we know somebody qualified has reviewed your program, and we know that they're from a third party perspective, they're unbiased, they're saying that you do or don't meet them, or here's what you need to do in order to meet them. And well, I've been seeing some trends of like resistance to third party audits, and I think it'd be important to address that here as well, because from a retailer perspective, I don't think it's going to go away. I don't think that the Krogers and the Walmarts are going to shift away from third party certifications because the sheer volume of companies that they review. And then it's a quick snapshot for them to say, okay, they meet the requirement or they don't meet the requirement. And it takes away some of that detailed review that they need to do. But it gives the company who's being audited, whether it's GFSI or not, from a third party, what it's doing is giving them a chance to reflect on their programs and improve where they need to improve. It's not intended to just be a check off the box and I have done this, this, and this, although there is a tendency, depending on which audit scheme you use, to go that direction. But the goal is not that. It's supposed to be a proactive approach to your programs and to be able to thoughtfully and intentionally create a safe food for your consumer. That's ultimately what the goal is. Those third-party certification organizations give you a guidance, an outline of how to get that accomplished. And to me, like from being in the industry and reviewing all these audits, I can see and read a lot in those audits and know what's going on in a facility because of that, because I've read thousands. And I know, and that's kind of going back to Martin's, like connection back to the leadership commitment. That's where I find I can tell if a leader is committed to their operation based on what I read in the audit, based on the behaviors of the facility, based on the repeated trends and things. So, those retailers, those food safety, or food service distribution companies that are reading these audits, they can see a lot into what their supply chain is, which again, there's kind of a saying that goes on in the industry: know your supplier and know your products. And you do learn a lot about them through third-party certifications.
Yeah, I can imagine. Well, thanks. That's definitely a quality insight on third-party certifications and kind of their influence and their impact. A lot of good technology trends that you guys have talked about. I wanted to transition to potential R&D activities that we might see in food safety. There's a lot of stuff, and these can kind of just be placeholders to expand on, but Maurice is, he's one of our internal experts. Maurice, do you want to take a stab at any one of these as far as just explaining, what kind of activities would a company want to see to have themselves qualify for an R&D credit and actually benefit from it?
Absolutely. Thank you, Brandon. And you will hear a lot of overlap from the panel discussion that we just had. There's a lot of integration of what has previously been said, but one thing we're seeing is, like I said before, supply chain traceability. So the use of QR codes, a temperature sensitive thermochromic ink, blockchain, Internet of Things, all that technology going into tracing any type of contaminants or any issues you might have in that supply food chain, whether that's from the farm or meat processing facility all the way up to transportation, even when it hits the shelves. Often when we're watching the news, we might see something like an E. coli outbreak. So using that supply chain traceability technology to track what's the source of that outbreak. So we're seeing a lot of potential research in that area. Another area that we're seeing is rapid testing or diagnostic technology. So the development of a lot of compact sensors, and this is within the entire food production chain, and also having that network configuration where you can get instant real-time alerts. We also see different novel technologies for rapid testing, whether we're looking at microbes, enzymes, allergens, like Martin indicated earlier, and also surface residues. So we're seeing a lot of development by biotech companies to develop these real-time rapid testing methods and diagnostic tests. Another area that is huge that a lot of people are seeing when they go into the grocery store: food packaging, coatings, and labeling. So you might see some type of embedded technology into food packaging that looks at the pH, looks at the temperature, looks at the fermentation, and that's all to ensure freshness, quality, and then compliance with regulatory standards. We're also, seeing, the food safety packaging, and also we're seeing the sustainability packaging. So the packaging, the green packaging that's sustainable. So it has to be safe. And nowadays, consumers are demanding that things are more sustainable. So that is a issue that a lot of companies are facing nowadays. We also see a lot of tamper-proof labels, whether that is with beverages. We see it with pharmaceuticals, And a lot of that is transporting over into the food safety industry, whether it's with meats or any type of product. We're seeing a lot of tamper-proof labels. And more recently, we're seeing it a lot due to COVID. When you're ordering food, you see that tamper-proof label, and that's one of their food safety mechanisms that they're using to say that this food is safe once it leaves, leaves this restaurant and is being delivered to your house. We also see antimicrobial coatings on produce to help extend shelf life and reduce packaging layers, and then also the use of other biological coatings to preserve foods. Another area we're seeing a lot of R&D in is cleaning and disinfection technology. So and this kind of piggybacks on rapid testing and diagnostic technology, seeing pathogenic monitoring and verification using like DNA analysis, development of clean in place or CIP process systems, microbial and rapid testing, like I mentioned before, and also the development of new detergents and disinfectants that are more sustainable, more biocidal, biological in nature. And then again, we touched upon this earlier, just meeting those, whether it's state or local regulatory compliance, and also meeting the third-party certification compliance. So instituting technologies or processes that help you meet those certification processes, whether you're in the field or you're in the meat processing facility, or if it's along the supply chain, or once it reaches the store. So these are potential R&D activities that we are seeing in food safety. They don't encompass everything, but it gives you a good indication of the trends that are going on. And I just want to ask Martin and Jennifer if they had any comment or they thought anything about some of these potential R&D areas.
Yeah, I'll tell you one that you popped up on your list here that I think I'd like to talk a little bit more about is certainly the packaging part of it. At Penn State, we've done a lot of work or doing a lot of work in the area of sustainable packaging. And without a doubt, over the next decade, we're going to be moving away from plastic. So much of our food packaging now is going into plastic. And we can tell you without a doubt that there's going to be a pretty big move out of plastic. And so right now, a lot of the packaging companies are working on developing different types of packaging. And certainly along with that then comes not only the packaging part of it, but also the packaging machinery that's needed, as well as the technologies in order to package in those types of containers. And so going from plastic into, I think we'll be moving back to a great degree into glass, back into into steel, or just like, the aluminum type of containers. So I think it's going to be certainly a big trend, over the next decade, as they move away from things like plastic. So that was one that I just wanted to point out that you had. Another one, I think it's really important, of course, is cleaning and disinfecting. We do a lot of work with listeria and control of listeria in food operations. And certainly we have the monitoring of that, but it's important for companies to continue to look at how they're going through and cleaning their operations. We already mentioned the fact that it's labor is become tight in certain areas, and so looking at technologies to help us do a better job in terms of cleaning and disinfection within the food operations is really important.
Yeah, I would agree. And the coatings. So I was seeing some, and this is prior to leaving Kroger, just some of the examples that were coming in of suppliers playing in that space of the coating, the antimicrobial coating, and the shelf life sustaining coating on produce, some traceability type technology that was going on to produce, so like identifiers and that sort of thing. I heard about that through the blockchain stuff that I've been involved in, where they're looking at how to connect the dots back to the farms. And then from the those, kind of the echo what Martin said, the sustainable packaging, but I was seeing the trends more on introductions to like technology on the packaging that would indicate how many days left you have on the shelf life of the product. And so it was
Wow.
like an interactive packaging that was kind of working. And that to me was unique and new. And they were looking at it, some of the companies that were bringing it to were talking about it in the kind of like the deli and meat counter space. So trying to help people know when that might expire, not just the best buy date that people put on it, because that's what we tend to do on the food service side and the food manufacturing side. We put a best buy use date, but an actual date of when it's going to expire, when it's just no longer something that you want to consume. And so I saw that as well, and I thought that was an interesting technology that was being developed.
Yeah, interesting. There's a lot of coatings and all the different things to kind of hopefully cut down on plastics, but also enhance the shelf life. So this has been a really good conversation. I have so many other things that I wanted to touch on, but we're kind of slowly creeping up to our 3 p.m. mark. I wanted to bring up, well, I won't even talk about it, but that can be another topic for another day. Really quick, our Leyton process, when it means for a company to kind of come on board and start the R&D process, we really just start off with the conversation, making sure, helping qualify some of the work in there. And we kick everything off with an assessment that pairs a company up with our teams of technical folks along with financial, through only really a couple short phone interviews and some documentation collection. That gives us the tools we need to do the heavy lifting and author a technical report. Essentially what we're delivering for any one of these companies that are active in R&D is a comprehensive kind of analysis and technical report that kind of draws a correlation between their qualified research and the financials that are attached to it. And so once we deliver that, you have that to support your claim. I'm sure there ever be any questions, as well as filing instructions. So we work pretty closely with a lot of CPAs and accountants. And that's really what the process for Leyton would be. That opens it up for any Q&A. If people had any questions that they wanted to kind of throw in the chat. If not, they can always reach out to us. We're here, to kind of answer any questions about, what might qualify or not qualify as an R&D activity. There's a lot of outsourcing and contracting work that's done that sometimes needs a little bit of a deeper dive. I encourage listeners to get in touch with Martin or Jennifer as it pertains to the kind of their expertise and the work they're involved with. I appreciate both of your times, Maurice as well. This really helps, I think, kind of round out the discussion, and I look forward to kind of seeing how the rest of this year plays out, and maybe there'll be an opportunity to do it again, possibly in a different group with another theme, but just continuing to drive home kind of thought leadership discussions in the industry. And I really appreciate both of your inputs, Maurice as well. With that, I think we'll sign off. I know it's Monday. We probably have a lot to do, and I wish everyone a wonderful week.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
all right, guys.
thank you. Appreciate you having us.
Yep. Take care.